So let's talk about layers and mask in Substance Painter. So if we go over to our layer window, we have icons like add effect, add a mask, add a empty layer, add a fill layer, add a smart material, add a folder, and delete. The layer system in Substance obviously works the same way as Photoshop or any other art software. What sets Substance apart from other software is a fill layer. Before going over about fill layer, let's start with an empty layer. So if I click here, it gives me an empty layer. And now if I come over to my properties, I have control over my brush properties. So if I start, I have all the control about my brush, size, flow, stroke opacity, spacing, size jitter, and everything. For our brush, if we want to enable pressure sensitivity through a tablet, we're going to go here and enable pen pressure for both of these guys. If I come down to our channels, my brush is consisting all of these channels which we have for our shader. So if you look over here to our base color and this tiny sphere which we have, it's going to control how our brush is going to affect our material. So let's pick something like white, completely metallic, and a bit shiny like chrome. And if I paint in my object, it's going to paint in that material. Let's say I want a red colored, I can go to red and paint it in. That's basically how you use an empty layer. You go in and you paint it. I haven't met anyone who uses empty layer like this a lot. Almost everyone I have met uses fill layer, personally me too. Main reason being it's pretty non-destructive. By that I mean right now since I hand painted, I can change the values. But let's say I want to make this metal color blue again. I lost all of those control. So this method kind of ends up being pretty destructive. So we're going to use fill layer for almost all the cases throughout this course. One thing I want to say, texturing, whether that's in Photoshop, Substance, or Mari, whether it's for a film or games, there's a huge benefit of using mask for texturing. It's pretty non-destructive, and I cannot stress enough for you guys to get familiar with using mask, especially for texturing. We're going to go about using mask in just a moment. So before that, let's start with a fill layer. If I go over here and create a fill layer, you see our properties changed. Right now, we only have properties for our fill layer, which consist of projection, filtering, and other stuff. But we still have our channels. So fill layer have the channels filled with a flat value, or you can use a texture. And if I play with these sliders or color, you see the whole color for our character is changing, and the whole material for our character is changing just by playing with these sliders. We can add in more channels just by going to our texture set settings. Clicking on this, let's say we have opacity, and if I go back to my layers, it has added a channel for opacity right here. To turn it on, I just click on it. To turn it off, I just click on it again. So let's say we want to make a blue shiny chrome material for some reason. So I can just go in and pick blue. That's not blue. I can pick in metallic and I can make it really shiny. But what if I want this color effect or this material to be affected in some specific place? If I go over to my fill layer and right click, it gives me the fill layer settings like duplicate, clear, cut, and copy. But I'm going to go and add a black mask. So since we added a black mask, everything we have disappears. Now I can paint in that mask to showcase where it exists, and I can paint in black to hide that material. I can paint it white again, and I can paint in black again. I'm switching my brush color from white to black just by hitting X on my keyboard. So this is what our mask is doing, basically describing where that material, which we created through our fill layer, exists and where it won't. It's kind of like erasing, but it's not erasing it. It's just hiding it and making it visible in some places. This method of using mask is pretty non-destructive. I can show you an example. If I go back to my fill layer, and let's say instead of a blue metal, we want a red color. So if I go over to this color, and pick in red, it's going to change its color to red. Let's say we want a matte, we can go over to matte, and pick in matte. It's going to change its color to matte. If I go over to this color and pick in red, it's going to change its color to matte. If I go over to this color and pick in red, it's going to change its color to red. Let's say we want a we can go in and make it matte. So just having that control and not losing a lot of information makes mask a pretty beneficial tool for texturing. So let's delete these guys and create one more fill layer. And if I right click on it again, let's just go over what we have. The first four things are our mask, to add a mask to our fill layer. The bottom few things are basically cut, copy, duplicate, and instance. Down below, we have a folder system. Now you can color a layer in Substance just to have more selection option or more organization. Below that, we have our add generator, same thing as these guys. You can access this just by right clicking on it. So let's go over mask. So let's create a black mask again. So to recap what a mask is, it's just a black and white map, which is gonna tell Substance where this fill layer or material will exist and where it won't. So the ways which we manipulate this mask in Substance is pretty simple. We're gonna use a lot of effects which exist right here. We can also access these guys just by right clicking on our mask and coming down below. On top, we have selections like export mask, invert mask, toggle mask, and the same thing which we had over here in our fill layer. So in our add effect, we have an add generator. So generator are those fancy Substance magic things. Generator utilizes our baked maps and generate quite few masks, giving us all the controls and the power to change it to get something which we want. Add a paint is going to add a paint layer where you can paint in using your mask or particles in your 3D mesh. Add a fill is going to add a fill which we can use procedural or textures to control our mask. Add a levels, basically add a level so you can control your grayscale value. Add a filter adds an option for you to use any filter that Substance has to offer, or you can download new ones. Add a color selection is basically how we are going to use our ID map to pick in some colors and extract a mask out of it. You can also get a color selection just by right clicking here and picking add mask with color selection. It directly does that. The last thing which we have is add an anchor point. Anchor point is basically you making your mask an instance so you can use it over and over again into different layers or different fill layers. So let's just go in and delete all of these guys. And let's say I painted a quick mask. So if I Alt left click on my mask, I can see where my mask is affecting and what it's doing. I can still paint in to have a visible control over my mask. And if I go back and press N, I can see what my mask has done. If I shift left click on my mask, it's going to disable my mask. And if I shift left click again, it's going to enable it. So before we wrap this up, let's talk about these channels, which we just briefly used here and what they do. So let's quickly go over them. Let's create one more fill layer. And if I go down, the base color, as the name suggests, controls your base color. Metallic describes if the element is metal or an insulator. So if I go to 1, it's a metal. If I go to 0, it's a non-metal. The metal values should either be at 0 or at 1 and not in middle. It's just an ideal PBR way to do stuff now. So let's keep it at 0 or at 1. Roughness is basically an inverse of gloss map now. So it's going to describe how rough or how not rough the surface is, or how glossy or non-glossy the surface is. So if I go over to this direction, you can see our material is pretty shiny. And if I keep on sliding to the right, you see it's gonna get a bit matte-ish. One fine thing with this slider is if I'm dragging this, and let's say I want some specific settings, if you hold shift while you move the slider, you go in a precision mode and the slider is gonna move a bit slower so you can get a more specific control over things. Or you can just go in and enter a value and hit enter. The next two things which we have is a normal. We are rarely going to use a normal. It actually changes your normal which you have baked down, and sometimes painting a normal instead of a height usually helps, but sometimes it does not. Height is going to describe how bumpy or how not bumpy the surface is. So let's just come in and make a quick mask. And if under fill layer, if I change my height value, it's going to bump it out and bump it in. Opacity is something which we added right here. And if we go into our texture set settings and add new ones, you're going to get more settings for these. But for now, let's just keep it simple. By default, we're going to have our opacity and emissive gone. The only thing which we have from the beginning is base color, metallic, roughness, normal, and height. So these are the channels that we are going to use to get something out of substance. Using a layer and a mask is a pretty simple system, but combining this simple system over and over again help us achieve whatever we are trying to achieve in substance. So since we have that covered, let's start texturing our character.